Welcome to The Accidental Trainer, a podcast where you'll hear firsthand stories and tips on how to start and grow your training career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ATD Accidental Trainer podcast. I'm your host, Alexandria Clapp, and today we have with us Julie Dirksen. Julie is a learning strategist, author of Design for How People Learn, and the newly released Talk to the Elephant. Hi, Julie.
Hi there.
I am so excited to talk with you a little about the topic of your new book, Designing for Behavior Change. But before we get into that, I would like to ask you about your career story. So how did you land in your role today, and what was accidental and purposeful along the way?
Yeah, I feel like there's a few different paths that people find into the career, but probably the most common one is I always describe it as, hey, you're a good customer service rep. We're going to let you train the other customer service reps. And actually, I wasn't a customer service rep at the time. I was a data entry clerk, and I got to train the other data entry clerks. So I had a lovely English undergrad, which it was lots of fun, and I read lots of cool stories and really enjoyed it. But it did not immediately point me to a career path. And so I did a certification in teaching English as a foreign language and did that for a little bit. But at the same time, I had a sort of just part-time, do while you were in college job for a financial company doing loan application data entry. And at a certain point, they said, "Hey, you want to train the other data entry people?" And I said, "Sure, let's try that." And then got really interested in. I didn't mind the training part, but it turns out the part that I really liked was designing the curriculum and coming up with the activities and coming up with things. And I also got interested in technology. This was the 90s. So, technology was a great burgeoning thing at the time. I mean, not that it isn't still, but, and so got really interested in that, started doing some project management around a front end system for the customer service group, and also doing training for customer service, and was kind of interested in that tension between, do you fix the person or do you fix the system? Which I think led to a lot of stuff in my later career around an interest in things like user experience design, and quite frankly, the stuff we're going to talk about today, which is the behavioral change. Eventually, I did go get a master's in instructional technology and did a lot of e-learning consulting, and then eventually kind of moved. I still do some consulting work, but honestly have spent a lot of my time kind of helping other instructional designers get up to speed, because there are so many people teaching things because they have this domain knowledge, they have all this expertise, and not necessarily a lot of guidance for how do we teach it to somebody else, which was the sort of the goal for the first book. And now we're at the second book. Apparently, it takes me about a dozen years to cook and actually write a book, but here we are, number 2. So
here we are, number 2, and let's just jump into it. You called this book Talk to the Elephant. I know it sort of builds off of an analogy that you referred to in your first book. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why is it called that? And then hopefully...
Yeah. Talk to the Elephant, Design Learning for Behavior Change. And unfortunately, the subtitle gets really important so that people have some idea what it's about. I went back and forth on that, about whether it was a bad idea to have your main title not be clear about it. But also I was like, well, I think the elephant's a good, strong, image that people will remember too.
Mm-hmm.
So the elephant is, I did write about it in the first book. It's from a metaphor by Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist, in a book he wrote called The Happiness Hypothesis. And he talked about how our brain is like an elephant. And so a big swath of your brain is concerned with moving you around in physical space and controlling your physical actions, your gross motor actions and your fine motor actions and your fingertips. And it's about perceiving, light and sound and smells and, physical touch sensations in the world, and, interpreting all of that. And it's also about emotions and, emotional regulation and fight or flight and all of those kinds of things. So you have this big swath of your brain, physically, in sort of just terms of brain geography, this is actually, I think, probably more of your brain than the areas that are doing logic and reasoning and, verbal conscious, decision making and things like that. So this big physical entity part of your brain is in his metaphor the elephant, and then sitting on the back of the elephant is a little rider, which is logic and reasoning and impulse control and executive function and things like projecting out into the future and considering consequences and reasoning. And it's the part of your brain that like talks to you and makes the logical argument for things and all this kind of stuff. And that's like our little rider sitting on the back of a big elephant. And one of the things that happens in almost all training stuff is we really focus heavily on talking to the rider. We're going to make the case for this, but we're going to make this sort of logical case. And the rider understands things like abstractions and future consequences and all this kind of stuff. Whereas the elephant is like, if I can't touch it, taste it, feel it, if it isn't happening right now, I kind of don't care. And so whenever we have behaviors that people struggle with, it's often kind of a push-pull between what the elephant cares about, what the rider cares about. And so one of the examples I always use is like hand washing. We all, I'll usually ask people like, how's your hand washing game going now that we're, a few years past the start of the pandemic and things like that. And people are like, yeah, right. And if you think about it, like, the physical hand washing versus the intellectual knowledge piece is really interesting for this, because if your hands are dirty, like you'll wash them, like that's usually not a problem. It's my hand looks clean, it feels clean, it smells clean, it seems clean to me, but I know intellectually that germ theory is a thing, and I know I should wash this, and I know I shouldn't wash it for like 5 seconds, I should wash it for like 20 seconds, which is what I personally struggle with, is how long you're supposed to do it. And it doesn't sound that long when you say 20 seconds, but it's a real long time for your elephant. And so when people do hand washing curriculums, they always find a way to make it concrete and real for people, whether it's like the black light, if you're, a well-funded, training initiative where you can see the actual bacteria on the hand, or whether it's they do activities with rubber gloves and, this and that and the other thing to show you like the real, like to make it real and physical for you, because they know that just the intellectual knowledge that you should probably isn't going to be enough when you're at the, 7.5 hours into an 8-hour shift and everybody's tired and grumpy and just wants to go home. Are they still going to be washing their hands for 20 seconds? And the answer is, it turns out those behaviors start to fall off, right? So one of the problems we have with so much training curriculum that gets assigned is it talks to the rider, but it really leaves the elephant out of the conversation. And that's great because your rider can override your elephant some of the time. But again, if you get tired or you're working in a hurry or you're not paying close attention or any of those kinds of things, all of a sudden, some of those behaviors are going to get skipped over. And you're just not going to prioritize some of these things where it just doesn't, it doesn't feel to your elephant like it matters. So anyway, that's the explanation for the rider and the elephant. And that's why the book is called Talk to the Elephant, is because in cases where we have behaviors where people know what to do, so it's not a knowledge problem anymore. They know what to do. They know how to do it. And it's still not happening. Then the problem at that point is you really need to be talking to the elephant.
I was wondering about memory while you were talking about the rider and the elephant. Thinking you can know something. So does that make it, well, I guess I should just phrase it as a question to you, because I think it's probably complicated. I'm interested to see what your response is. Like, where does memory fall into this analogy?
Yeah. And it depends on what kind of memory we're talking about. And by that, I mean, there's like the memory of what to do, right? But then there's the remembering to do it. And those are actually two really different problems to solve for, right? Because one is just, can I get you to hold this information? Can we burn this into some, brain cells long enough for you to hang on to it for some period of time? The other thing is about like, a big swath of our day kind of runs on autopilot, and I don't always remember to interrupt myself in the middle of a thing to do a thing. So another example I always use is flossing. Like, I can know that flossing is a good idea and it's important. I can know how to floss. I can even be like decent at it. Like I think I'm, probably when I do floss, I'm probably not bad at it. I can even want to floss, like genuinely be like, yep, I'm on board. Don't want gum disease bad, want to floss. And it still sometimes fails to happen if it's not a habit or if it's not built into, my program or, the kind of the things that I'm doing automatically during the day. And so depending on where the gap is it that they don't know that flossing's good? Is it that they don't know how to floss? Is it that they don't know, they know how to floss, they know it's good, but they just kind of like, I don't know if it really matters. It's not a big priority for them. Is it that they, um, the perception is like, it's kind of a pain and I don't want to deal with it. Like there's a whole slew of stages that somebody could be going through with this. And we need to figure out what that is because otherwise we're solving the wrong problem. So if it's like, I know all of this stuff, but I kind of don't care that much because I'm 22 and I've never had like, significant dental work and I don't buy into this stuff yet, then it's about like maybe doing something where you get to really like see your own, see a simulation of your own gums getting really nasty. And then you kind of go, okay, I don't want that. Or is it about like, hey, I need to help you troubleshoot some strategies. You're going to floss while you're waiting for your coffee to brew, or you're going to I have a nice cup full of those floss things that sits on my desk. And that increases the likelihood that I'll remember during the day. Like, is it strategies? Is it motivation? Is it, if it's not ability, what other solution is actually going to help you with this particular behavior?
I'm thinking of your chapter 3, where you're talking about all the different stages and how that could be useful to a learning designer. Can you go into a little bit of how that's helpful for a trainer, a facilitator, and what that means if you're trying to identify like where people are? Is that like a process that you do before you even design the training now? Like,
there's a couple things there because it does impact how you design for it, right? You want to make sure that you understand where your audience is. And it's possible that your audience may be in all of those places. You may have a real, widely dispersed audience. And so then you need to make a decision. Am I going to try to like take everybody through the process together? And I mean, flossing's kind of one thing, but like if we were talking about something more significant, like a work function or something like that, am I going to try to take everybody through together and kind of make sure that everybody sort of advances? Am I going to assume that people are going to move through at different paces and I need to make sure that there's resources available? Am I going to try to create an experience that they can adapt or customize depending on where they are in the process and what they need? And so that kind of plays into some of the things about like, how do you blend out strategies or resources or support to kind of meet people where they are and kind of move them to the next step. There are some models of change. We were chatting about this one a little bit briefly. Like there's the Prochaska model, which looks at things like pre-contemplation, contemplation, planning, acting, maintaining. But the idea that you kind of move through these, and part of what they're always saying is it's kind of a mistake to try to force somebody to skip over anything, right? Like if you're in pre-contemplation, which means it's not even really on your radar yet, then trying to force people to act is probably not likely. You want to move them to contemplation where you want them to start thinking about it. And then planning is where they're not doing it yet, but they're actively making a plan and figuring out. So if somebody's going to start exercising, planning is like, okay, am I going to walk? Am I going to do this? What do I need? Do I need to get new shoes? Do I need to like make a plan with my friend? Those kinds of things. And then, then you take action, and then the question of maintenance and things like that. And, toward the end of these cycles, there's different versions. I have one in the book that's kind of like 10 steps. And I just put a tool up on my website, actually, that's a little survey instrument for kind of sending out to your audience to ask them about kind of where their perceived kind of gaps are in this process. But part of the problem, or one of the struggles that we have when we look at kind of the behavioral science literature in this space, is we've got a lot more information about getting people started than we do about maintaining or dealing with people when they fall off, because it's just a harder problem to research, right? Like, you need, it's easier to be there when they're starting in terms of the way that research is funded and like research projects are set up, than it is to be there 6 months down the line when they're like, I've been doing it every day and now it's starting to fail a little. And so we don't know as much in the scientific literature about what exactly, and I mean, there's the obvious answers, like if, somebody's been running every day, but then they get COVID, that's going to, mess with now this habit that they built or something like that. There's obvious like things that can derail people. But we don't know quite as much about like, how do you identify when somebody's at risk of kind of falling off of, like a behavior that they've been trying to do regularly, and it starts to, because we've all had those, right? Like habits where I'm like, I'm doing great, all of a sudden I'm not doing it, and then it's gone, right? And the obvious answers is some kind of support or feedback mechanism, some kind of accountability, something that social relatedness keeps people on some of those plans a lot longer. I'm doing some work with Michelle Segar out of the University of Michigan, who does a lot on exercise motivation. And I mean, her bottom line is like, if you're forcing yourself to do exercise you don't like, eventually your motivation is going to fail. So find things that you do not dislike, at least, if not actively like, because that is not how exercise was certainly communicated to me as a child. But the idea that like, hey, if this isn't like pleasant or fun, or at least interestingly challenging to you, you probably should find a different thing to do, because, you're only going to be able to force yourself for so long.
Yes. I feel like anecdotally that really tracks for me. Like, spent my whole life swimming and was able to abandon it very easily and never go back to a pool, where I like very regularly do a yoga practice now almost every day.
Yeah. And I mean, there's absolutely things that fit into your life better, right? Like I have been very regular with like a personal trainer thing, doing weight stuff, just hand weights and things. But for, I don't know, I think like 4 years now. But one of the things that happened in COVID is we switched to doing it on Zoom. And I got to tell you, it's pretty great to only have to like walk down to my basement to do this, as opposed to like drive the half hour over to the gym and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
I think that has been part of keeping it up consistently, is just like make it as easy as possible. Honestly, making the behavior as easy as possible, that one always works.
Yeah.
It may not work perfectly, but there's other strategies you can try that may not pay off, but honestly, making it as easy as possible pretty much always pays off.
Yeah. I mean, we feel like we could just talk about that for like 5 hours, and strategies and like the barriers that get in the way of making things easy as possible. Or if people are even trying to set up a framework for making it as easy as possible, and identifying all the different ways that you can do that before you're rolling out a training or you're offering some type of learning experience.
Yeah, there's a researcher, Gabrielle Odejan, who looks at she was looking at the question of, we always, I think it came out of, I don't know, the 70s or 80s or something, where this visualize yourself succeeding, right? And she specifically did research into that question of whether that visualizing yourself being successful actually improved the likelihood that you're being successful. And what she found actually is that a much better strategy is visualize all the things that can go wrong, but then make a plan for them. And that is actually a better predictor of success than picturing it all going well. Okay, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to do it every day. But what could go wrong? Well, I could I could get the call that I need to go pick up the kids from the, daycare. Well, what are you going to do if that happens? Okay, let me think about that. Those kinds of things, like having a plan ahead of time for what am I going to do if, I hit this block or this block or this block or this block. Turns out it's way better in terms of ensuring that the behavior happens and happens consistently. And that's something that we can do in a lot of training classes, right? Okay, you're going to go out and you're going to do this new sales process that we've just taught you. Let's talk about now tell me everything that you can picture that might kind of derail you from being able to do this new sales process. And then we'll do a half an hour workshop in groups where you all figure out strategies to handle that if those things come up. We can build some of that stuff. There's action planning, and if this happens, I'll do this. Yeah, which is implementation intentions, which is a different researcher, Richard Goldwitzer. But we could be building a lot more of those things into our learning experiences instead of being like, okay, we told you the thing, now go, to help, and it helps with transfer, and it helps with them kind of having the attitude of like, okay, I'm going to hit some roadblocks. It's not going to be perfect the whole time, but I have a plan for some of these roadblocks. And also if I hit other roadblocks, at least I know that like the idea is like, I can kind of work my way around them.
Yeah, it makes me think of, it seems to me to be like a combination of different techniques. Again, it's just like, which research are you pulling from and how you make sense of it in your own head? I think of like the combination of like mental practice or visualization with metacognitive regulation skills, like the planning and monitoring and controlling. So you're combining like, what do you do in this planning stage? Or what will I be doing when I'm monitoring myself in the task and I need to adjust or change something with, okay, now do that before you actually do the task where it's low stakes and it doesn't matter whether something happens or doesn't happen, which is, kind of reduce the stress barrier where you can walk through the task without any impact that if you do it wrong, it's fine because you're just mentally practicing it. You're not like actually doing the task right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's good to be upfront with like, you're going to hit some roadblocks, you're going to hit some barriers and potentially with this new behavior. Let's talk about how we manage those so that the expectations sort of set. Because we've all had ones where I'm like, I'm going to do this cool new thing and I'm going to do it every day. And then like the first time it just goes south, you're like, done, out. Okay, that didn't work. Right. And I mean, I feel like I spent a lot of my adult life learning how to not do that, but people do, right? Like the first time it goes wrong, they want to abandon. And, part of it is like one of the biggest challenges with any kind of behavior change. I was mentioning this beforehand, but is competing priorities. Everybody's got 37 things they're supposed to be doing with every minute of every day these days, and it's getting worse, not better. And so one of the things we all know the kind of WIFM, the what's in it for me. But the problem is if you're selling this and it goes in and they're like, okay, I get it. But it goes in at like number 36 of 37, like it's still not going to happen. Most people can get to their top 5 maybe. And if it's not in their top 5 or it's not the nice activity they want to do while they're trying to avoid the top 5, it's, like there's no time for it. And so that really raises the stakes on helping people understand the value of an activity, or behavior or something like that. So if it's the value of entering notes into the client record after a sales call, or the value of, following through on, disability claims, or, trying to handle, IT support calls in one call, or, whatever it is, whatever the behavior is that we're trying to help people with, the value, if it's presented in kind of abstract terms, like, we're going to be super customer focused and we're going to handle calls on one, as opposed to, hey, this is the real thing that happens if we don't manage this. Like, this is the real cost, not only to the organization, but the cost to you, and things like that. And so a lot of I have a whole chapter on trying to communicate value in a way that's tangible and immediate and feels likely and things like that. Because a lot of times we're telling people about behaviors where their personal experience is not that. We can tell people that texting while driving is bad, but most people have gotten away with it at some time, right? And so the intellectual knowledge, the rider says texting while driving is bad. Yep. The elephant's like, except, sometimes, and it's probably fine. Like they said it's bad, but really I have all of this personal experience of getting away with it and it's been okay. So one of the things about these things is when your physical immediate environment is saying one thing about this behavior, but your intellect knows another thing about the behavior, we think we're going to follow the intellect, but actually it happens a lot less than I think most of us would like to believe.
Okay, so many thoughts. I want to go back to the biggest challenge, some of the biggest challenges to behavior change. You mentioned competing priorities. So I was mentioning to you, as I'm looking at, maybe this is a good segue for us to talk about some of the behavior change models that you use, or why you use COM-B versus other ones. And I was asking you, like, does this track? Does this make sense? So something that we did in my old organization, we kind of adapted that skill will matrix to skill will availability when we were identifying candidates for our training program. It could, because it was quite a long training program. It was really like a leadership development opportunity. We were partnering with clients, so it was unique in that they're external to our own organization, but everyone had a lot of stake in this. And to devote like 60 plus hours for someone who is very qualified and they're very interested and they are not available. They have to pick up their kids in the afternoon. Their husband's doing a master's program, whatever it is that makes them, they're actually not even going to be able to deliver this program that we were training them for months and months. And I'm sure that people listening, like dagger to the heart, have similar pain points, or something has happened in their organization where they've put blood, sweat, and tears into designing a program in their organization that ultimately maybe isn't leading to the behavior change that they were expecting. And I think that it's probably a common challenge for folks. And so just seeing that, I was like, oh, it's so interesting that this could sort of line up with this COM-B model. So I want you to, tell us more about it.
Skill, will, and availability absolutely kind of lines up, because COM-B is capability. Are they capable of doing the thing? And capability has, like, do they just have the skills and knowledge of doing it? But it also gets into things like emotional regulation. I was just reading, I've got a study open on one of the tabs in my browser about the ability to pay attention, and they're actually saying that it's increasing, not decreasing. In the same way that things like, overall IQ is increasing in a lot of populations. So that's an interesting one. But like that ability to pay attention or focus or to do something repetitively for a long time would also be in capability and things like that. There's the opportunity, which is broken out into two categories. So opportunity is either social opportunity, which is, does my social environment support this? Do I see the behavior modeled? Did the social norms around me support it? Things like that. And then there's physical opportunity, which is a lot of like the systems piece, right? I can tell people that they need to save records in a certain way in the computer system, but if the computer system is just a nightmare to use, and there's definitely easier, faster ways to just kind of skip over some of these steps, then we really should fix the computer system, not try to harangue the people into doing it. So that's a physical opportunity. Or is it, do we want, people to use safety harnesses when they're working at certain heights, but the safety harnesses are like back at the office, versus having some that are literally right there on site so you could grab it in like 2 minutes? That's a physical opportunity kind of thing. And then we look at motivation, and we look at automatic and reflective motivation. So reflective motivation is like motivation that you have if you have stated goals around something, if it is, you can talk about how something's in accordance with values or beliefs, around it. That's all reflective things you can reflect on or talk about. And then automatic is all that stuff that kind of runs unconsciously. So habits, biases, things that kind of happen when we're not looking, are all kind of in that automatic motivation category. And so then you can use these items to analyze, a particular behavior. So if the behavior is like wearing sunscreen, for example, do I know how to wear sunscreen? Yeah, pretty much, right? Although like a lot of people don't use enough, you should actually put more like physically on and stuff like that. Do I have sunscreen in the household? Do I have it? And if the answer to both of those things are yes, then we start to look at things like motivation. Like, I should be really motivated to wear sunscreen. I've got several family members who have, kind of constantly getting stuff taken off because of, fairly low level kind of skin cancer stuff and things like that. So, and I'm a pasty northern person, so I'm not great in too much direct sunlight. But that's something that's going to happen, I mean, now it's starting to happen actually, but theoretically it's something that's going to happen years from now. And so then that starts to be a motivation problem around, yeah, I believe in it, but do I actually, act on it? And so being able to pinpoint those things then kind of maps over to certain kind of intervention functions. Like training works for some of these, but some of them are motivation or incentives or rules or, different kinds of enablement support or anything like that. And then what the COM-B model and eventually ends up with, and this is all part of this behavior change wheel, which is out of University College London, Susan Mickey and her team, kind of distilled this out of many behavioral models, ends up with this library of 93 intervention functions or intervention techniques that they've seen in the research literature. So we have this big body of different options that we can use to help people with these behavior change. And we've got some research stuff behind it and things like that. And they're trying to build more of a, flexible database around searching for functions for researchers and that kind of thing. And this is a model, but it's very similar. It's got certainly similar components to what you were talking about, which is the skill, will, availability thing. There's other models out there that are also very good, like the Fogg model has a lot of nice things. BJ Fogg and his model for supporting behavior change, he's focused a lot on habit research. There's EAST, which is like easy, applicable, simple, something social. I don't know. I should totally remember this one, but I might actually have to look that one up, which is out of like behavioral insights, which comes from kind of a background of behavioral economics. So there's a bunch of these, and I picked one because you gotta pick. It is not in any way a critique of these other models. They're all great. They all have really interesting things to offer. I like COM-B because it's both kind of fairly straightforward at the top level, but has a lot of depth underneath it. And they did create it by they created the whole behavior change wheel by like assessing, I think, 19 different models and trying to figure out how do we kind of distill this into a single coherent model, because all of this stuff came up in a bunch of different domains. So some of it is straight up psychology, some of it is social science, some of it is public health, some of it is specific verticals like safety or finance or, things like that. Or behavioral economics. And so now all of these things are kind of coalescing into a single sort of behavioral science field. And we're starting to see that make its way into other kinds of organizations. So you're starting to see companies with behavioral units, or you're actually starting to see a job title around chief behavioral officer. So it's behavioral science as its own thing is definitely kind of coming into play. And not that much of it had made its way back over to us in learning and development. And so that's kind of the goal behind the whole book, is to try to bring some of this toolkit in to help support people who are doing learning and development work.
Yeah, I love that. Especially because, as you talk about so many different domains that this model all pulled from and distilled, that feels relevant to folks who are probably trying to think about applying these principles now into their work. And they're coming from all different industries and fields. They're thinking about it in the context of working in a financial institution, or maybe it's 911 training or whatever it is, that there's just going to be so many people that I know the ATD community serves that we hear from. Maybe they're just a really small organization too. And so wondering. So actually, this is a great segue to talk about some examples, because you have a lot of stories of different organizations that are already doing this work and how it's played out in their different contexts. So I'm hoping maybe you could share some of those case studies.
Yeah, one of the things that was really a challenge. So I have some that are kind of fictionalized versions of maybe work that I've done or work I'm familiar with over the years. Because I was trying to figure out, how do I talk about all these solutions without it being overwhelming? And so I have kind of like 4 case studies grouped in the book of doing it with doing some of the different solution sets with things like moving a workforce to remote, or helping, a professional organization with their retirement savings initiative, or safety as a development plan as opposed to safety as a kind of compliance issue, or things like that. So I've got some examples that I've written, or and either based on my experience, or colleagues of mine helped me out with some of the examples and stuff. But then one of the things I really was happy that I got to do at the end of the book was to write about, to do interviews and pull in about half a dozen different examples of some of the work that people have done. So one of them was a curriculum around entrepreneurship, like business management and entrepreneurship for women in farming cooperatives in Rwanda. And part of the interviews was to look at the process that they had for things like that. Like, how did they learn about their audience and make sure that they were matching it up? And that one was really interesting because if you talk about things like monitoring inventories or cash flow, or, any of these entrepreneurship contexts, like most traditional curriculums or books that are out there are going to really not be adapted to that particular environment and those particular constraints, right? So there's all sorts of social factors, and there's all sorts of, the realities of the environments and the worlds that they're in and things like that. And so that case study I love because it had a lot of really nice ways that they had done user research to help kind of adapt this, adapt as much in as many of these behaviors as possible. And one of the big components that they looked at, it was the social issue, right? Like if these women learn about this stuff in this classroom and then they go back out and the rest of their social environment basically shuts it down, that's the end of it, right? In a lot of cases. And so one of the things that they really looked at was like, how are you going to talk to this with your family? How are you going to talk about this with your coworkers? How are you going to, let's actually make a plan for how you're going to like communicate about some of these things in a way that helps you garner the social support that you need if you're going to actually implement some of these things. So that was a really great one. Another one was I talked to Sebastian Bailey, who's at Mind Gym in the UK, and he's been using Combi as he and his team have been using Combi as kind of a foundational analysis tool to look at leadership or management behaviors and things like that. And he was telling me that it was really interesting because in one organization, it might be social opportunity, but in another organization, it might be capability. Like, this organization, they're capable, but the social environment doesn't support it. What are we going to do about that? Versus this organization over here, where it's not a social issue so much, but really they do need to develop the capability. And so being able to make good decisions about that and not assume that you need the exact same solution set. Even if the problem looks similar in different places, it may really have some different characteristics. Another one was another interview I did was with the folks at Sports Integrity Australia, and they are lovely, and they're dealing with helping athletes with education around anti-doping issues. So how do you help encourage athletes to not take illegal substances? And they have a really interesting set of problems because there's the pure sort of values-based thing of don't cheat, but then there's also an enormous kind of bureaucratic function around how do you not screw this up, because it's a very bureaucratic world, the world of like athletics testing. And then there's the how do you not do it by accident, because there's so many. If you look at all these, like, your average sports drink, it's got 9,000 ingredients in it. How are you confident that this thing isn't going to mess you up on a drug test? And so it was a real combination of education and experiences and tools. They created this cool app for looking at things that would tell you whether a particular supplement was high risk or low risk, things like that, this whole kind of surrounding these athletes with a whole kind of suite of experiences and tools to support the behaviors that they wanted to see. So yeah, it was really fun. I did an interview with the company in Pennsylvania that created Harness Hero, where you can harness your little guy up it's a mobile game, and you can kind of harness them and make a bunch of choices, and then you push them off the ledge and you see what happens to them. I love that one. And I talked to somebody from Japigo who had done a big piece in Nigeria around AIDS testing. So, and one of the things they found out there is that men who are reluctant to get tested, it wasn't because they didn't understand the need for it. It wasn't that they didn't think it was a good idea. It was that they were genuinely kind of worried and concerned and, out and out afraid of what the outcome was going to be and how much that was going to change their lives. And so it was kind of an avoidance issue from the point of view of, if I find out I'm positive, am I unlovable? Do I never get to have fun again? Do I never get to have a relationship? Do I never get to have any of these things? And so they really significantly changed the messaging away from you really, really, really should get tested more towards, hey, having HIV doesn't have to change your life anymore. There's a whole bunch of reasons why you're still lovable and you're still going to have fun and you're still going to have relationships. You just need to, change some things about the medication you're taking, but it does not even have to be that hard. And guess what? We don't need you to automatically take the test, but just figure out, can we just have a little bit of conversation? Can we text you? What's the next step in the process rather than making the whole leap? And it's such a thoughtful example of how, sort of telling people louder and more emphatically that a behavior is a good idea, versus really trying to understand what's keeping people from engaging with it. That I think those are absolutely my favorite part of the book. Actually, is some of the case studies we did at the end of the book.
I love it. As I'm listening, I'm just thinking of there's examples where it's helping you identify where a person might be in their learning journey or that the stages towards behavior change that help for how you're going to design something for them, and or at the same time also what is missing or not missing, the strengths and weaknesses of where people sit with that COM-B model, just as you're describing these samples. So this is just so exciting. And as I told you, I know that we were not going to get to everything in your book, looking at all the chapters and all the good stuff. So before we kind of switch to your learning goals, I wanted to just pitch it to you one last, what did we not get to talk about right now that you want to make sure that people know about? Just a little insight.
I do think that, my sort of, we were talking about kind of my learning journey, as a career, but I got interested in this topic because there's a particular project that I worked on in kind of the mid 2000s, which was also an AIDS and HIV prevention project, actually. And one of the things about it was I was like, okay, everybody by mid 2000 knew about condom usage as a method for preventing HIV transmission. And so it wasn't like, what are we going to do with a whole e-learning, experience with this online stuff? Just tell them that repeatedly. They already know. And so it was a really interesting time for me because I feel like as an instructional designer, I had a good toolbox for helping people remember things or helping people develop skills or, learn procedures and stuff like that. And I was like, there's a bunch of other tools I need in my toolbox. And they had, the researchers that were attached to this project, it was through the University of Minnesota, had a bunch of things that they were bringing to the table. And we were more figuring out how to put it into a digital environment, or sort of early web environment. It was, long enough ago. But that kind of sent me down this kind of quest to look for it. And so I think if there's things I would like people to know about it, it's really that it doesn't have to be, hugely intimidating, but there are all of these things, and I mean, there's all this conversation going on right now about what jobs AI is going to subsume. And I don't know where I stand. I'm trying not to have opinions about the AI stuff. I keep failing, but I keep trying. Mm-hmm. But I do think these hard problems aren't going away. And so it is to our benefit as a field and as practitioners to have a really good toolbox for some of these really hard problems because, we can create all this medical technology and we can create all this medication and stuff like that, but we can't, we still need to deal with the fact of what if the patient doesn't take the medication as prescribed? How do we help somebody with that behavior? Or, if somebody doesn't change lifestyle factors after a heart attack or something, those problems are not going to get fixed entirely by technology. And so we need to understand about behaviors in order to help people with that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love it. Even just thinking about the AI conversation, if you've designed this great AI app that gives you all these nudges, but I'm trying to think now, like in the context of these models that we've been talking about, maybe it's not accessible, it's not available, you can't find it, or maybe your motivation to use it, it's not the silver bullet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's possible that AI is certainly going to help with kind of analyzing some of these problems and things like that. It's because one of the things that almost always happens is that there's almost always a theory of why people in the audience aren't doing the behavior when you come into things. And it's almost always kind of not right. So, I've had clients tell me that their learners are lazy, and I'm like, really? Are you sure? Is that really that's not a helpful answer that we can design to? I think we should ask a few questions, and I'm like, how'd you find all the lazy people anyway? Everybody I know is so busy they can barely see straight. So I don't really know that many lazy people. Are you sure it isn't that they just have better things to do right now? So, so being able to unpack those things, and that's actually, I think, potentially a nice use of